Hello and welcome to this new live stream. Today I'm going to be talking about Bitcoin, and further down the video I'm going to tell you about what is the actual real value of Bitcoin. But I'm going to start with just looking at the trends that have been happening in the last couple of years, and especially right now, especially when an economic crisis like the one we are seeing today comes about. We have to remember that Bitcoin was created in the last economic crisis in 2008. I've been looking through this big list of companies that have made a lot of profit in the last 12 months. And a couple of industries stood out a lot. Number one, there was a lot of profit being made in IoT industry, so optimizing buildings for energy consumption, adding new sensors, and providing SAS solutions so that the building owners could actually analyze the data from the sensors online and see the graphs and everything for the energy consumption. But the other industry that has been seeing a lot of change is payment solutions. So we've been going from having to make payments by logging into the bank to being able to just click a button on the mobile phone and sign the payment using a secure sign-in function with a security key, and make the payment with just one or two clicks. I looked at everything that's been happening in this space, and it's very, very clear right now, because Bitcoin has been kind of going. First, it went really exponential. It had its really huge increase in perceived value, and then it fell, and now it's kind of been going a little bit more reasonably upwards. But what we have to look at is what happened. We have to see this in the light of how file sharing has changed the music industry starting in 2001. We have to look at that because I think it's very similar. The way that Bitcoin is changing payment industry is exactly the same way that file sharing has changed the music industry. It took the music industry almost 20 years to catch up to that. In the beginning, everybody was looking really negatively at file sharing, downloading music online, and now we're listening to Spotify. So the solutions have come, but it took 20 years to get there. And the same thing is happening to the Bitcoin idea, because Bitcoin is also, it's a peer-to-peer way of exchanging value. It's a way of doing value exchange peer-to-peer, exactly like file sharing was a peer-to-peer way of sharing files. You no longer had to go to a theater. You no longer had to buy a CD. You could just share it between peers online. And the file sharing, first, it also saw its when the file sharing first started, it also saw this extreme increase in popularity, and there was a lot of people doing shady stuff with file sharing. Like everything was just a wild west. There was no, there were no systems that could capitalize or make it more acceptable in society and make it into commodity services. There were no systems like that back then. And then gradually those systems has been put in place, and streaming from the internet and watching movies that are downloaded from the internet has become the standard way of watching TV today. And so the Bitcoin, since it's been around now since 2008, it's 12 years. I think it's going to be within around like 3 to 5 years, Bitcoin is going to be everywhere. Banks are going to start using Bitcoin technology. They're definitely going to be using Bitcoin technology. It's not really, they might not use the Bitcoin as it is, but I think that Bitcoin technology is going to completely replace the currency as we know it today. But let's look at what Bitcoin actually is. So let's look at let's go back a few thousand years and look at what money is. So money has been created by people to exchange value. It's been created to decouple the sale of something to the purchase of something. So you no longer had to take and exchange something physical and make a sale in order to make a purchase. You now could make a sale and then make a purchase later for using this intermediate medium, which we call money. And but in essence, it's just a way to decouple the sale and the purchase. and the medium of exchange. So the value of the money is determined by the perceived value of this exchange. So for example, if somebody exchanges something for X amount of money and then they want to buy something, they expect that if this thing that they sold was around had a certain perceived value, then what they buy also has a certain perceived value that is somewhere near there. And so that's how and when this is applied to all of the products that we have, like when this is not just a handful of products, but when it's applied generally in the whole society, the value kind of stabilizes at a certain amount, or actually just at a certain level, because there is no amount. We look at money as a number, but it's really it's something more abstract. It's more it's something like that we just perceive. If we perceive something as valuable, it has some value to us. We can't put a number to that really, but because we have to be able to count it, we put a number on it so that we can keep track of it. And so the primary purpose of money was to make it easy for people to make transactions. Now, if we go thousands of years until now and look at what Bitcoin has been doing, is precisely the same thing. They've been optimizing the way people make transactions. And they've been doing so by applying the technology that's been around for years, which is based around cryptographic keys. I'm going to do a little short explanation that I think is going to be very clear to you. It was so. What they have done is they made this transaction, the way that people make transactions, more secure. So now it is possible to keep track. You can actually know that that when somebody is paying you, that transaction is actually taking place. You don't need to, and when that transaction has taken place, even if there is many people in between, they cannot do anything to that transaction. So they cannot change that transaction. And this is the biggest innovation with Bitcoin. It's when you make a transaction, when you send, let's say you want to buy something and you would send physical money, or you would actually even if you pay by your credit card, then you're still sending money. You're still sending money in a certain form. Either it's digital or it's physical. But anybody who is in between, who is going to forward that money to the final destination where it's supposed to go, they can modify that amount. It's harder because now we have very good tracking technology, and but it's still they can still make changes to that transaction, and nobody will notice that change has been made. With Bitcoin, it's impossible to make changes. It's impossible to make a change to a transaction that originates in one place and then goes to another place. Along this way, and once the transaction has been made, it's impossible to change it. And the reason for that is because Bitcoin is using cryptographic keys. It's really sort of the core concept of Bitcoin. If you want to understand Bitcoin, it's actually very simple. It's not a complicated concept. Basically, you have two passwords. And you use one password to encrypt your message, and you use a different password to decrypt your message. Now, you can't use the same password to decrypt your message as you use for encrypting your message. And you can't use the password that you use to decrypt your message in order to encrypt the message. And the consequence of this is that when you receive the message, you can't change it and then encrypt it and forward it to somebody else, because you can't encrypt the message. You can only decrypt the message using the public key. The encryption has to happen with the private key. And so when you're making a transaction in Bitcoin, you are signing the transaction with your private key, and then somebody else who has the public key, because the public key is public, everybody knows the public key, then they can verify the transaction, and they can verify that it's been encrypted or signed with your particular private key. So now when you want to make a transaction, even if somebody can see and decrypt the transaction, they can't change it, because they cannot then encrypt a new message that can be decrypted. And this is really the whole concept. There's a little bit more it's a little bit more involved, obviously, especially when it comes to actually this signing process, because Bitcoin puts a constraint on the signing process. The signing process has to take time, so it takes a lot of computing power to do the signing process, and that's precisely what is called Bitcoin mining, is the signing process, because that is what is taking time, and that's there is a purpose to that. It's the purpose is to make it hard to sign the transaction. It has to take time. So really, the value of Bitcoin can be kind of thought of as the time it takes to, or more precisely, the computing power it takes to make a transaction. Now, of course, people put monetary value in it, but we'll get to that later. So and when this transaction is put into the global database, so here's the other innovation of Bitcoin, is this global ledger. We don't have a global ledger with normal the traditional money. It's of course you have kind of sort of a ledger in your bank account, but there is no global ledger that can be completely unified, that can be verified, and you cannot get an overview over the global ledger of monetary transactions. And Bitcoin completely changes all that. So it becomes the overview becomes completely clear what is going on in the network. So when you make a transaction and you put it into this ledger, what is happening is that you take you make a checksum of this transaction, and you get a number. So basically, like a sum. Let's just to keep it simple, we can say that you add up all the data and you get a sum, a number. Now, that number is then encrypted with your private key, and it can be verified with a public key, and then whoever wants to verify it also takes the checksum and compares it to the checksum that's in the signature. Now, if you chain the transactions together, you actually get what is called the blockchain. So blockchain is basically taking this checksum and taking the next transaction and including that checksum into that transaction before making this block part of the blockchain. So once this block is placed into the blockchain, it's kind of like keeping track of all the changes. I don't think most people understand what Git is unless they are programmers. I'm making this video for people that are like the general public. I'm not just talking to programmers, but it's pretty much like Git. So it keeps track of changes, and you cannot insert a change somewhere in this chain. You can't just put another transaction in there and then expect all of these checksums to be the same. So it's impossible to put anything into this chain of transactions. And so once a transaction is in there, is in the chain, it's always in there. And then other transactions are added on top, and it becomes impossible to change that. So the value. So we can ask ourselves, like, what is the value of Bitcoin? Well, what would be the value of Bitcoin if money did not exist? Like, what would be? How much would Bitcoin? How would we say if somebody asked the question, "What's the value of Bitcoin?" How would we describe it if traditional money did not exist? And that's a hard question to answer, because we're not used to thinking that way. We're not using Bitcoins to buy stuff in our everyday life. So it's hard to answer the question of how much is it actually worth? Like, is it worth, is one Bitcoin worth a loaf of bread, or is it worth a house? It's hard to answer that question. And I think that where we are going, the way that this is going to be changing now in the coming years, in 3 to 5 years, or maybe 3 to 8 years, is that the governments are going to be seeing this possibility to greatly, like massively simplify the monetary transactions in a country. So they've been looking at it. They've been looking at Bitcoin as a threat. They shouldn't really be looking at it as a threat, because imagine if you could withdraw taxes They should look at it like, imagine you could withdraw taxes automatically from every transaction. Like, wouldn't that be cool? So where we're going right now, I think, is that we're gonna be seeing whole countries accepting cryptocurrency. They're gonna be transitioning their currency system, the traditional database number in the database system, into this cryptographic system where every transaction is verifiable, and where you cannot introduce any inconsistencies into the ledger. So money will never, it's never going to be possible to print money in this new system. It's going to be a pure medium of exchange, exactly like was intended to be from the beginning. And this is why I think Bitcoin is going to be massive. It's going to, like cryptocurrency in general is going to be massive. This way of making transactions and assigning value to numbers, it's going to change everything. It's not going away. It's going to change everything, because it's the way of doing it that makes the most sense, and it's simple and it's extremely reliable. So we're going to be seeing countries having their own coins. So for example, I live in Sweden, so we would have like the crypto crown. I mean, imagine that. That's kind of cool. Crypto crown. And it's going to be in the country, everybody would then agree to use crypto crown to exchange value, and people will be making transactions exactly like with Bitcoin, electronically, and the government will be keeping track of this full ledger of all of the transactions. They're going to be getting like an easy overview, like what is going on in the economy, and people are going to be enjoying an easy way to pay that doesn't suffer from these horrible shortcomings that the banking system has. Like, they're not open on weekends. What the hell is this? The 80s? Like, this is not the 80s anymore. Come on, like get updated a little bit. Hello there, and so we'll be seeing more of this. But I think it's not going to be limited to this. It's going to be far from just the currency of a country going over to crypto. We're going to be seeing the whole stock market. If we look at the stock market, it's going to be completely moving away from how it's been done before. Because right now it's still kind of the digitalized version of the paperwork system, where you just sign papers and keep them in drawers. It's going to be the whole this whole idea of buying portions of companies. It's going to be moved to crypto, and you'll be seeing things like a company would have their own cryptocurrency. And anybody who wants to buy that cryptocurrency would essentially pay the company in a more general currency, and receive a portion of this company as a cryptographic transaction into their cryptocurrency account, and so they can then sell that portion to somebody else. But it's going to be very clear that that's the coin of this. That's the Swedish embedded coin. I don't know if I'm going to start a coin myself. It's just but it's interesting to play with the idea of how that would work. And so anything that's related, but this whole financial market is going to be like completely turned upside down. But I think the government are seeing this, but they're not really aware of how to deal with it. They're not aware of the new ways of how to actually handle it. Like, you need to have technical knowledge of how this technology works in order to be able to apply it constructively to the things that we are doing every day. So I think it's going to be a lot of fun. It's going to be a lot of things are going to come out of this economic depression. If this is going to now transition into depression, a lot of innovations are going to come out of it. Bitcoin came out of the last depression, and Bitcoin is going to take a huge jump during this depression, and hopefully it's going to become the standard way of making transactions in every single country. Thank you for watching, and subscribe. Go to swedishembedded.com, get notified. I'm streaming this on Twitch and uploading the videos to YouTube. So if you want to watch this live and comment, then go to Twitch or go to swedishembedded.com and then subscribe to my channel. And you can always go there and watch the episodes live. So thank you for watching, and I'll see you later.